The Texas sun poured down like molten gold over the Montgomery estate, turning the manicured lawns into a dazzling stage. Rows of white chairs stretched across the grass, in perfect alignment, each one occupied by someone important. Oil magnates, socialites, politicians, venture capitalists. The who's who of the state's power circle had all gathered. They expected a spectacle. What they did not expect was the bride. An uneasy silence drifted through the crowd when the organist began to play. Heads turned, eyes squinted, whispers rose. They had all heard the rumors, but none of them believed William Montgomery, heir to one of the richest families in Texas, would actually go through with it. A man of his stature was supposed to marry prestige polish a name as heavy as his own. Yet the woman walking slowly down the aisle was no socialite. Anna Robinson moved with measured steps, clutching a bouquet of pale roses borrowed from another arrangement. Her dress was not custom silk, not couture flown in from Europe. It was a dress donated from the back of a department store rack, altered hurriedly by a seamstress who had done her best. The satin pinched under her arms, the hem dragged, and the pale shade did nothing to flatter her deep brown skin. Still she walked. Each step felt like a weight, pressed onto her chest. The whispers sharpened, cutting at her with invisible knives. She had been folding sheets in the mansion only hours ago. Now she was in front of hundreds of eyes that never once noticed her existence. To them she had always been background noise, a maid who scrubbed bathtubs, polished silver, and faded into corners. Today she was center stage, not because they wanted her there, but because someone had dragged her into the spotlight. At the end of the aisle, Will Montgomery stood tall, smug in his tailored black suit. His grin was not tender, not loving. It was the grin of a man pulling a stunt, of a man daring the world to stop him. He did not reach for her hand. He did not meet her eyes. Instead, his gaze swept across the crowd, relishing every shocked expression. On the front row, Evelyn Montgomery's face was pale beneath layers of powder. Her fingers clutched her pearls as though they might shield her from humiliation. Beside her, Richard Montgomery's jaw tightened so hard his temple pulsed. Their son had done unthinkable things before, but this was war. Anna's heart pounded so loud she could barely hear the minister begin. His voice trembled slightly as he said, "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." The words floated like smoke, thin and meaningless, against the roar of whispers spreading through the lawn. "She's the maid, right?" hissed one woman in a wide-brimmed hat. "Is this real?" another whispered. "He must have lost a bet," a man muttered under his breath. Phones rose discreetly. Screens flickered. A society scandal was unfolding in real time, and no one wanted to miss it. Hashtags were already being formed, ready to explode across the internet before the vows were even finished. Anna tried to keep her chin high, but her fingers trembled around the bouquet. She wanted to vanish. She wanted to tear the dress from her body, run barefoot down the aisle, and disappear back into the world where she was invisible. At least invisibility did not hurt like this. But her feet kept moving step after step until she was beside him. Will leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Smile, sweetheart. You are about to make history." She did not smile. Her lips pressed into a thin line. She was not history. She was humiliation. The minister cleared his throat. "William Montgomery, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "Absolutely," Will answered quickly, loudly, without a pause. The word rang out over the crowd like a taunt. Some gasped, others chuckled nervously. Will's smirk widened. The minister turned to Anna. Her chest tightened. Her throat was dry. She hesitated for the briefest moment. Then, under the heavy weight of every gaze, she whispered, "I do." A hush fell over the crowd. It was not the hush of romance or awe. It was disbelief, as though the very air did not trust what it had heard. "By the power vested in me," the minister said, his hands trembling slightly, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Will did not hesitate. He grabbed her hand, roughly yanked her closer, and pressed a dry, mocking kiss onto her lips. It was not love. It was a declaration of rebellion. The cameras flashed. The guests gasped. Somewhere in the crowd, someone laughed. Anna's body stiffened her skin, burning where his hand gripped hers. She felt like a trophy, raised high proof of his defiance. When he pulled away, he flashed the crowd another grin, satisfied, triumphant. The applause never came. Only silence thick and suffocating hung in the air. Anna lowered her gaze, her heart aching with humiliation. She knew then, as surely as she had ever known anything, that this was not a marriage. It was a weapon. He had not chosen her out of affection. He had chosen her because she was the one person guaranteed to wound his family. They turned to walk back down the aisle together. His stride was confident, casual. Hers was stiff, mechanical. No rice was thrown. No cheers followed. Only murmurs like sharp daggers pricked the air behind them. When they reached the end of the aisle, Will pulled out his phone with his free hand already texting. Anna glanced at him, a storm of rage and shame swirling in her chest. "You used me," she whispered. He smirked without looking up. Epic wasn't it? "You saw their faces." Her eyes burned. "You dragged me into your war." He finally glanced at her, amused, unrepentant. "You are my wife now. Welcome to the Montgomery legacy." Her spine stiffened. In that moment, she silently vowed one thing. This would not be the end of her story. She would not remain a punchline. One day they would see her for who she truly was. But for now, under the unforgiving sun, Anna Robinson was nothing more than a scandal, a maid dressed as a bride, and a pawn in a billionaire's rebellion. Anna Robinson sat alone in the small guest room assigned to her after the ceremony, staring at the plain walls as though they might offer answers. The sounds of laughter and clinking glasses floated faintly from the grand ballroom below, where her new husband basked in the chaos he had created. She had not expected comfort, but she had not expected this coldness either. The room was not the bridal suite. It was the same modest chamber she had been given during long nights working as staff. A narrow bed, a dresser with a wobbly leg, and a single lamp that flickered if you twisted the knob too far. She removed the borrowed dress, carefully folding it across the chair with practiced precision, the way she folded every sheet and towel in this house. It was all she knew. Work done neatly, quietly, without complaint. But tonight her hands trembled as she placed the satin down because she understood with painful clarity what had happened. She was not chosen as a partner. She was chosen as a weapon. Her mind drifted back to where her life had begun, far from the chandeliers and manicured lawns of the Montgomery estate. She was born in a small brick house on the east side of Dallas. Her mother, a caregiver at a retirement home, filled their world with faith and discipline. Her father had died before she turned 10, leaving behind little more than a battered Bible and a set of promises whispered by candlelight. Her mother always told her, "You are more than what people see. Respect yourself, respect others, and trust that the Lord has planted strength in your bones." Those words carried her through childhood, through Sunday mornings filled with gospel music, through school afternoons spent helping neighbors through nights when dinner was nothing more than beans and cornbread. Anna grew up poor, but she grew up proud. By 16, she was tutoring children at church. By 18, she was working 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. And by 19, she entered the world of housekeeping. It was not glamorous, but it was honest. She learned quickly how to polish silver until it gleamed, how to iron without leaving a single crease, how to keep her voice calm when wealthy guests looked through her like she was invisible. She worked in many houses before she found herself at the Montgomery estate. At first, it seemed like just another job. The mansion was bigger, the schedules stricter, the chandeliers taller, but it was still labor. Sheets, dishes, floors. Only the faces changed, and most of them never looked at her long enough to remember her name, except for Will. Even before this twisted marriage, she had seen him move through the house like a storm. He was handsome in the way magazine covers adored sharp jaw, unruly hair, shoulders, squared with the confidence of wealth. He walked fast, spoke fast, and treated the staff with casual indifference. He never yelled, but he never saw them either. To Anna, he was lightning bright and dangerous, best admired from a distance. To Will, she had always been part of the background. That was why the proposal stunned her so completely. He had barged into the kitchen days earlier, his suit jacket undone, eyes burning with reckless fire, declaring he needed her. Not in the way men usually spoke those words, not with tenderness, with desperation, with defiance. He had offered a marriage not as a vow, but as a weapon against his parents. She had refused at first, horrified by the thought. But pressure and confusion, mixed with his relentless confidence, cornered her into silence. By the time she realized the magnitude, it was too late. Now she sat in the quiet of a servant's room, wearing her plain nightgown, staring at the silver band around her finger. It was not a ring of love. It was a shackle of humiliation. Downstairs, Will raised glasses with his groomsmen, his friend Darren whispering jokes loud enough for her to hear earlier that day. He really did it. Darren had laughed, married the maid. Darren had always been, that way, a shadow to Will's recklessness, encouraging every scandal, every rebellion. He was the kind of friend who thrived on other people's chaos. Anna despised him instantly, though she kept her face still. She had been taught never to show weakness in front of men like that. But tonight, as she stared at the small lamp flickering beside her bed, she allowed her heart to ache. She had dreamed of love once. She had dreamed of a man who would see her, not her position, not her poverty, not her silence, but her. She had dreamed of soft mornings of holding hands in public, of children who laughed freely, of a porch swing for her mother. Now those dreams felt further away than ever. The reality was a billionaire husband who saw her as a rebellion, a family who saw her as an insult, and a world watching through the cruel lens of gossip. Still something stirred in her chest, small but undeniable, a seed of defiance. She remembered her mother's words, "Respect yourself, trust your strength." Anna whispered to the silence, "This is not how my story ends." Meanwhile, Will paced the grand hall downstairs, sipping his drink and replaying the expressions on his parents' faces. To him, the day had been a triumph. He had broken their iron grip, humiliated their expectations, and shown them he would not be controlled. He thought himself clever, bold, untouchable. But even as Darren slapped his back, and the guests whispered in corners, a faint unease flickered in his chest. For one brief moment during the ceremony, he had looked into Anna's eyes. He had expected fear or compliance. What he had seen instead was fire, hidden but alive. He brushed it off with arrogance, but somewhere deep, a part of him knew this was not over. Upstairs, Anna lay awake, her eyes fixed on the ceiling, the silver ring pressing cold against her skin. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing with certainty. She would not be silent forever. Morning light spilled across the Montgomery estate. But inside Anna Robinson's small guest room, the air was heavy with silence. She had barely slept. The ring still circled her finger, mocking her with its cold weight. She rose before dawn out of habit, as if her body still belonged to the schedule of a maid. Her feet patted across the polished wood floor, and she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back was not a bride glowing with happiness. She was a servant dressed in the wrong role, trapped in a game she had not agreed to play. Downstairs, the mansion buzzed with tension. The staff whispered when she passed, unsure whether to bow their heads as before or offer the respect of a lady of the house. Some still called her Miss Robinson. Others avoided her altogether, eyes sliding away, as though acknowledging her presence might betray them. At breakfast, she entered the grand dining hall timidly. The long mahogany table gleamed under chandeliers, but the food laid out was untouched. Evelyn Montgomery sat at one end, her posture ramrod straight, her teacup trembling slightly in her hand. Richard sat beside her newspaper folded, but unread, his gaze fixed on Anna as if she were an intruder. Will arrived last, his stride casual, his smirk firmly in place. He kissed his mother's cheek as though nothing were amiss, then sat at the head of the table, motioning lazily for Anna to sit beside him. She did her body stiff, her eyes lowered, so Richard finally said, his voice cold as steel, "You have embarrassed us all." Will chuckled, cutting into his toast. "Embarrassed you, perhaps. Liberated me." Evelyn's hand shook, rattling the china. "She does not belong here," she whispered. Will leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp with amusement. "She is my wife. That makes her belong more than anyone else in this room." Anna's chest tightened. He said the words as though they were armor, but to her they felt like chains. She remained silent, eating nothing, her stomach knotted with humiliation. After breakfast, the whispers began to spread beyond the mansion walls. Photos of the wedding appeared on social media headlines, screaming across news outlets, "Billionaire, heir marries his maid." Speculation swirled. Was it love rebellion or madness? Some comments defended her, praising her dignity. Others tore her apart, mocking her dress, her skin, her position. Anna scrolled through them late that night, each cruel word cutting deeper than the last. She set the phone down finally, her hands trembling. She whispered to herself, "They do not know me. They see what they want to see." But the sting remained. Days passed, and the lines between maid and wife blurred painfully. She attended dinners where no one spoke to her except in polite, clipped tones. She walked halls where portraits of past Montgomery wives watched her with cold, painted eyes. She endured Darren's smirks, his whispered jokes to Will that made her ears burn. And yet, beneath the humiliation, something unexpected began to grow. One evening she found Will alone in the study sleeves. Rolled up frustration etched across his face as he flipped through financial documents. He looked different then, less arrogant, more human. She hesitated in the doorway, then asked softly, "Do you need help?" He glanced up, startled, then smirked. "What would you know about this?" Her jaw tightened, but she stepped closer. "I can read numbers. I can listen. Sometimes that is more than most people do for you." For a moment he looked at her, as though seeing her for the first time. The smirk faded, replaced by something quieter. He handed her a page. She scanned it carefully, pointed out an inconsistency, and to his surprise, she was right. That night he did not call her the maid. He called her Anna. The shift was small, but it ignited something neither of them expected. Still, the world outside did not soften. At a charity gala 2 weeks later, Anna stood at Will's side in a borrowed gown. The cameras flashed, capturing every angle, every sneer, from the women who had once dreamt of marrying him. The whispers grew louder, sharper. "She will not last. It is a stunt. He will annul it within a month." Will smiled for the cameras, but Anna felt their words claw at her. She excused herself, stepping out onto the balcony, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She leaned against the railing, breathing hard, whispering, "I will not cry here." Then she heard footsteps. Will appeared beside her drink, in hand, his face softer in the moonlight. "Do not let them get to you," he said. She turned to him, anger sparking. "Easy for you to say. You are not the one they laugh at." His gaze sharpened. "They laugh at me too, Anna. They just do it behind closed doors." For the first time she heard weariness in his voice. He was a man suffocated by expectations, rebelling in the only way he knew. Still, she could not forgive the way he had used her. "You dragged me into this war," she whispered. He stepped closer, his voice low. "And I did not realize you would be stronger than me." The tension between them pulsed sharp and undeniable. For a heartbeat, they stood too close, his breath brushing her cheek, her hand trembling on the railing. She pulled back quickly, heart racing, whispering, "Do not play with me." He did not answer, but the look in his eyes haunted her long after. That night she returned to her small room, but sleep refused to come. She kept replaying the balcony, the way his gaze had shifted, the way her own chest had tightened. Somewhere between anger and humiliation, another emotion had begun to grow. Something she did not trust, something she feared might undo her completely. And yet beneath it all, she knew this was only the beginning. The first storm had passed, but darker clouds gathered on the horizon. The Montgomery estate felt colder in the days that followed, not from the air conditioning, but from the subtle shift in atmosphere. The staff who once greeted Anna with hesitant politeness now avoided her entirely, their eyes darting away, as if acknowledging her might cost them their jobs. Evelyn's silence turned sharper than words, her lips pressed into thin disapproval each time Anna entered a room. Richard, however, was not silent. One evening at dinner, he set down his fork deliberately and said, "This farce ends soon." His voice carried the weight of authority, the kind that had built empires and crushed opposition. Will leaned back in his chair, smiling faintly. "The marriage is legal. There is no farce, just your inability to accept reality." Anna sat between them, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She said nothing, but her mind raced. She knew she was being watched, judged, measured. She was no longer invisible, but she was not seen either. She was a problem, a pawn, a disruption. That night she wandered the halls alone, her footsteps echoing against marble floors she once polished. She paused at the family portraits lining the corridor. Generations of Montgomery wives stared back at her pale and perfect, captured in oils that celebrated their beauty and wealth. None looked like her, none came from her world. Yet here she stood wearing their name. She whispered softly to herself, "I do not need to be one of you. I need to be me." The next morning she accompanied Will to a charity luncheon. He insisted she come, his arm offered stiffly, as if daring the world to challenge him. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and polished floors, tables lined with linen and silver. Conversations hushed the moment they entered. Anna kept her chin high, her gown simple but elegant, her natural curls pinned neatly. She sat quietly at the table as the speeches droned on, but her attention wandered. She noticed how people glanced at her, then away quickly, whispering behind napkins. She noticed the way Victoria Lamar, the woman Will's parents had once chosen for him, stared with icy contempt from across the room. Halfway through the event, a guest leaned too close, his voice mocking. "Tell me, Mrs. Montgomery, how long before you tire of cleaning up after him?" Laughter rippled at the table. Heat rose in Anna's chest. She could have ignored it the way she always had, but something inside refused. She turned her gaze on the man steady and unflinching. "I have worked my whole life, sir. I am not afraid of work, and I am certainly not afraid of anyone who confuses cruelty with wit." The laughter faltered. The man's smirk faded. The table fell into silence. Will, watching, blinked in surprise. It was the first time Anna had spoken publicly in defense of herself, and her words cut sharper than any retort he could have delivered. When they returned home, Will studied her quietly, his arrogance tempered by something like respect. "You were incredible," he admitted. She looked away. "I was simply tired of being treated like I was less." In that moment, Anna realized her strength was not in wealth or name. It was in her voice, her dignity, her refusal to bow. She began to see herself not as a pawn in Will's rebellion, but as a player in her own right. Still, the war was far from over. Late one night, she overheard Richard speaking in the study, his voice low but firm. "She will break. She is not built for this life. All we must do is wait." The words struck her like ice, but instead of fear they lit a fire. She would not break. She would not fade. If they wanted a war, she would fight it her way. Alone in her small room, she opened her Bible and whispered, "Lord, give me the strength not only to endure but to rise." Her reflection in the mirror no longer looked like a maid wearing borrowed silk. It looked like a woman preparing for battle. The next morning she dressed with care, not in wealth but in pride, and walked into the dining hall with her head held high. For the first time she did not feel like an intruder. She felt like someone who belonged, not because they accepted her, but because she chose to stand. News of the Montgomery marriage spread like wildfire. By the end of the month, the internet had turned Anna into both a fascination and a target. Social media threads exploded with speculation. Some painted her as a gold digger who schemed her way into wealth. Others romanticized her as a Cinderella figure, the maid who stole the billionaire's heart. Memes, hashtags, and gossip columns multiplied daily. At first, Anna tried to ignore it, but it became impossible when even the staff whispered about the headlines. One morning, she entered the kitchen and found the television tuned to a gossip channel, replaying footage of the wedding. The commentator sneered, Notice how stiff the bride looks. This is not love, this is scandal. Laughter filled the room. The staff quickly turned off the screen when they saw her, but the damage was done. Anna walked out without a word, her heart pounding. That night she sat alone in her room, scrolling through comments. Some messages from strangers cheered her on, telling her to stay strong, that she was an inspiration. Others were cruel, dissecting her skin, her weight, her background, as if she were less than human. Tears burned her eyes, but she swallowed them. She whispered to herself, "They will not define me. I will define myself." Meanwhile, Will reveled in the chaos. He smirked when his friends sent him screenshots of articles, treating the scandal as entertainment. At a private party, he raised a glass and declared, "To freedom." Darren clapped him on the back, laughing, "You broke them, brother." Married the Maid and destroyed the dynasty in one move. But when Will glanced across the room, he caught sight of Anna standing alone near the edge of the balcony. Her face pale, her shoulders tense. Something in his chest shifted uncomfortably. Later that night, he approached her, his voice quieter than usual. "Do not read the comments." She turned to him, her eyes sharp. "Easy for you to say. You created this circus. I am the one they are tearing apart." His smirk faltered. For the first time, he had no clever reply. Instead, he said softly, "You are stronger than they know." She shook her head, her voice trembling. "I should not have to be strong every second just to survive you." The words struck him harder than he expected. He left without answering, but her voice haunted him. Days later, the pressure reached a breaking point at a public charity gala. The ballroom glittered with wealth, but beneath the shimmer lurked tension. Anna walked beside Will, her hand resting lightly on his arm, her gown modest but elegant. Cameras flashed furiously. Reporters shouted questions. "Anna, did you marry for money? Will, is this marriage a rebellion against your parents?" Will waved them off with his usual arrogance, but Anna felt every flash like a dagger. Inside, whispers filled the room. She caught sight of Victoria Lamar seated at the front table, her smile polished, but her eyes full of disdain. When Anna and Will were introduced on stage, the crowd clapped politely, though the air vibrated with judgment. Anna's chest tightened, but she lifted her chin. The host asked them to share a few words. Will leaned toward the microphone, his charm effortless. "This marriage is exactly what you see," he said with a grin. The crowd chuckled nervously. Anna's stomach churned. She felt as though he had confirmed their worst suspicions, that she was nothing but a pawn. Something inside her snapped. She stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "What you see is not a joke. I am not a stunt. I am not a headline. I am a woman who has worked every day of her life with dignity. If that threatens you, so be it." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked furiously. Some in the audience looked shocked, others impressed. Will stared at her speechless. For the first time she had spoken, not as his pawn, but as herself. That night, the internet lit up again, but this time the tone shifted. Clips of her words went viral. Hashtags praised her courage. Anna Montgomery speaks her truth trended across platforms. Commenters called her powerful, authentic, unshakable. For the first time, she was not just mocked, she was admired. Will watched the coverage in silence, a strange mix of pride and guilt gnawing at him. Later, in the privacy of their suite, he approached her. "You were extraordinary," he admitted. She faced him, her expression unreadable. "I was simply tired of being used." He stepped closer, his voice lower. I am sorry. The words seemed foreign on his tongue, but they were real. She studied him carefully, her guard still high. Sorry does not erase what you did. He nodded slowly. No, it does not. But maybe it can be a start. The tension between them thickened no longer. Just anger, but something deeper, sharper. Their eyes locked, breaths shallow. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, almost against her will, Anna allowed her hand to brush his. He did not seize it. He simply let their fingers rest together, gentle, tentative. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. That night, when she lay awake, she realized her heart no longer hated him completely. Somewhere in the wreckage, something fragile had begun to stir. She whispered into the dark, Lord, do not let me be a fool. But her chest ached with the dangerous possibility that the man who mocked her might one day be the man who cherished her. The shift between Anna and Will was subtle at first, like the first warmth of sunlight after weeks of cold rain. He began lingering in the mornings, waiting until she finished her tea before leaving for meetings. At dinners, he no longer dismissed her presence. Instead, he introduced her by name, his tone louder than necessary, as if daring anyone to ignore her. And though he still carried his arrogance like a shield, Anna sensed cracks forming beneath it. One evening the estate was quiet, the staff dismissed early after a long event. Anna walked the garden alone, the night air cool against her skin. Her thoughts heavy. She paused beneath the arch where she had been forced to say, I do, staring up at the string lights that still hung there. They swayed gently in the breeze, fragile yet steady, and something inside her tightened. Footsteps approached. She turned to see Will Jacket slung over his shoulder. Ty loosened his hair, tousled, as though he had been running his hands through it all night. For once, his smile was absent. He stopped a few feet away. Do you hate me? The question startled her. She searched his face, expecting mockery, but instead found something raw. Some days she admitted softly, and others his voice was quiet, almost careful. She looked down at her hands. On others, I wonder if you are more lost than cruel. He exhaled a sound heavy with truth. Maybe I am both. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the rustle of leaves. Then he stepped closer, his voice low. You changed something in me, Anna. I do not even know how yet, but you did. Her heart pounded, warning her not to trust him, but her body did not move. He reached for her hand, slowly giving her every chance to pull away. When his fingers brushed hers, she felt a spark she could not deny. She let him hold it just for a moment before whispering, Do not play with me. His grip tightened, gentle but firm. I am not. Later that night, back in the mansion, Anna found herself standing in the doorway of his study. Will sat behind the desk sleeves, rolled hair falling into his eyes as he read over documents. He looked less like the untouchable heir and more like a man burdened with too much. She stepped inside. You should rest, she said. He glanced up, a smile, tugging faintly at his lips. Only if you do. She almost left, but something anchored her in place. Their eyes held the air thick with unspoken words. Finally, he pushed the papers aside and stood. Stay, he said simply. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed to protect herself, yet her feet did not move. He crossed the room, slowly closing the space between them. His hand rose, brushing a stray curl from her cheek. The touch was gentle, reverent nothing, like the arrogant man who had paraded her at the altar. You deserve better than what I gave you, he whispered. Her chest tightened. Then why did you? He swallowed, his jaw tense. Because I was angry. Because I was stupid. Because I thought using you would hurt them more than it hurt me. I was wrong. His honesty disarmed her more than charm ever could. Their faces were inches apart now, their breaths mingling. Her heart raced, but she did not step back. His lips brushed hers tentatively, soft, uncertain, not demanding, but asking. She let it happen, her eyes closing as warmth spread through her. The kiss deepened slowly, carefully, not the dry mockery of their wedding day, but something human, vulnerable. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against hers. Anna, he breathed her name heavy with meaning. She trembled, torn between fear and longing. She whispered, "If this is just another game, I will never forgive you." He met her gaze, steady and raw. No more games. That night they did not speak much. Words would have broken the fragile thread holding them together. Instead, they moved with quiet reverence, shedding not only clothes, but layers of anger and pretense. His hands were gentle, hers, hesitant at first, but then surer drawn by a hunger she had long buried. They gave each other one night, not wild or reckless, but tender, careful, filled with unspoken promises. When it was over, she lay against him, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time since the wedding, she felt seen. Neither said "I love you." The words would have been too fragile, too dangerous. But when morning light spilled across the room, Will turned to her, his expression softer than she had ever seen. "You are not my weapon," he said quietly. "You are my undoing." Anna looked at him, her heart trembling, and whispered, "Then maybe it is time you let yourself be undone." The calm between Anna and Will did not last long. Just as something tender had begun to grow, the storm outside their fragile bond gathered strength. Richard Montgomery was not a man who accepted defeat, and Evelyn was not a woman who forgave humiliation. They watched silently at first, letting the gossip fade, letting society's whispers shift into curiosity. But beneath the surface, they plotted, weaving a quiet campaign to dismantle what Anna was becoming. The first blows were small, almost unnoticeable. A charity invitation arrived, with Will's name only Anna's omitted. At a family luncheon, her chair was mysteriously missing from the table setting. When she instructed the staff, they delayed, their eyes darting nervously as though waiting for permission from someone else. One morning, the chef served breakfast to Will, but ignored her entirely, placing no plate in front of her. Will frowned and ordered another dish, but Anna saw the smirk on the chef's face as he left the room. It was a message: she was not welcome. She held her head high, but the sting settled deep. Later that week, she overheard Richard in the study, his voice low but sharp. "She will fold soon. She does not have the spine for this world. We just have to keep pushing." Evelyn murmured in reply, "And when she does, he will see reason. He always comes back." Anna pressed her hand against the wall, her chest pounding. They were not waiting for her to fail. They were making her fail. That night she confided in Will. He listened in silence, pacing the room, his jaw tight. "I will handle them," he said finally. But she shook her head. "No, if you fight for me, they will call me weak. If I fight for myself, they will learn I am stronger than they ever imagined." He stopped pacing, staring at her, something like pride flickering in his eyes. "Then fight," he said. The next morning, Anna entered the grand dining hall, not in silence but with intention. She wore a deep emerald dress that framed her figure with quiet strength. Her curls were pinned neatly, her posture perfect. She walked to the head of the table where Richard sat reading the paper, and Evelyn sipped her tea. She spoke clearly, her voice carrying across the long room. "I heard you plotting to erase me. I will not pretend I did not." Richard looked up slowly, his expression cold. "This is not your arena." Anna held his gaze. "It is now." The table went silent. Even Darren, lounging with his usual smirk, shifted uncomfortably. Will entered just as the words hung in the air. He glanced at Anna, then at his father, and without hesitation he walked to her side. "She is right," he said. "This is her arena now." Richard's jaw clenched, but Anna was not finished. She placed her hand gently on her stomach, then looked directly at Evelyn. "I am pregnant." The words dropped like stones into water, sending ripples through the room. Evelyn's teacup clattered onto the saucer. Richard's face went pale, then red. Darren choked on his drink. Will froze for a heartbeat, then turned to her, his voice low but urgent. "Are you certain?" She met his eyes firmly. "Yes. 9 weeks." For a moment, the room spun in chaos. Richard barked about legacy. Evelyn whispered frantic prayers. Darren muttered about scandal. But Anna stood calm in the storm, her hand resting protectively over the life inside her. "You thought I was temporary," she said quietly. "But I am the future you cannot erase." Will stepped beside her, his hand covering hers, his eyes blazing. "Our future." From that moment, the Montgomery War escalated. The family launched their quiet counterattack. Lawyers appeared at the estate, murmuring about annulments and settlements. Rumors leaked to the press about Anna's past, twisting her years of hard work into stories of desperation. Staff withdrew, further some openly hostile, others silently complicit. The mansion became a battlefield lined with chandeliers and cold marble floors. But Anna did not retreat. She found strength in new allies like Natalie, her old friend from the youth center, who was now a lawyer. They met secretly at a small cafe across town, Anna in a plain hoodie, Natalie with her sharp eyes and sharper mind. "They are setting traps," Natalie warned. "Financial, legal, social. You cannot trust anyone in that house." Anna nodded. "Then I will not. But I will not run either. This child deserves a mother who does not bow." Natalie slid a folder across the table. "These are documents I pulled on the Montgomery holdings. If you learn to understand where their power is, you will learn how to wield it." Anna clutched the folder, her resolve hardening. That night she began studying in secret, reading financial reports, board structures, voting rights. At first the numbers overwhelmed her, but she forced herself to keep going. She wrote notes in the margins, cross-referenced names, tracked alliances. She was no longer just surviving, she was preparing. Will noticed her late at night in the study papers, spread across the desk, pen in hand. He leaned against the doorframe watching her. "You are too smart to waste on this housework," he said quietly. She looked up, her eyes sharp. "I am not wasting anything. I am building." For once he did not smirk. He simply nodded. In the weeks that followed, Anna began attending business events at Will's side, not as silent decoration, but as an observer. She asked pointed questions, listened closely, and remembered everything. Some guests sneered, but others began to take notice. At one gala, when a board member tried to dismiss her, she replied calmly, "I may have started as a maid, but I know the value of work better than anyone in this room." The comment spread, whispered first in mockery, then in grudging respect. Will watched her transformation with awe. At night, when they were alone, the tension between them deepened, not only the tender intimacy of stolen kisses, but the fierce pull of two people standing against a world determined to break them. He told her once, his voice low in the dark, "You make me want to be better," she whispered back. Then be. But the Montgomery Empire was not ready to surrender. Richard made his move, manipulating allies on the board, planting seeds of doubt, quietly bleeding the company's accounts. To frame Will as incompetent, Evelyn charmed the press-painting Anna as an unstable influence. The storm was building again, darker than before. Anna stood at the window one night, her hand on her belly, the city lights glowing in the distance. She whispered, "They think I am weak. They will learn I am the storm." Behind her, Will stepped close, wrapping his arms around her. "Then let me stand in it with you." She leaned against him, her chest heavy with fear and love, knowing that the second battle was coming fiercer than the first. The storm finally broke when the Montgomery board summoned an emergency meeting. Rumors of financial instability had reached investors, contracts were wavering, and Richard saw his chance to strike. He arrived in a sharp suit, his smile thin and venomous, flanked by allies who had known him for decades. Will sat at the head of the table, his shoulders squared, but his jaw tight. Anna entered beside him, not sitting at the margins, but taking the chair directly to his right, her folder of notes in hand. Murmurs rippled around the room. Richard stood first, his voice smooth and calculated. "Our company is bleeding because of reckless leadership. William has been distracted, manipulated, and unfit to maintain control. For the good of the Montgomery legacy, I move for a vote of no confidence." He glanced at Anna, his gaze sharp as glass, and let the record show his instability began the moment he brought her into this family. The words hung heavy. Some nodded, others avoided looking at Anna. Will clenched his fists but said nothing. Anna's pulse pounded. She looked at Richard and rose slowly. "With respect, it is not William who has been reckless. It is you." Gasps rippled around the room. Richard sneered, "You are not even part of this board." Anna laid her folder on the table and clicked the remote she had hidden in her bag. Screens lit up with documents, transaction trails, and forged approvals. "I may not have a seat," she said evenly, "but I have the truth." Over the past 18 months, Richard Montgomery has rerouted funds through shell companies, falsified acquisition approvals, and bled the company while blaming his own son. Silence crashed over the room. Anna's voice sharpened. "These are not opinions. These are verified audits. Look for yourself." Heads bent over papers, screens flickered with proof. Richard's face paled, then flushed with fury. "This is fabrication." But Franklin, the CFO, who had once stayed quiet, spoke for the first time. "It is not. I verified the documents myself. The data does not lie." Murmurs grew into outrage. Board members exchanged shocked looks, whispers of fraud and betrayal circling like vultures. Richard slammed his fist on the table. "You think you can destroy me with paperwork? This company was built on my back." Anna met his rage with steady calm. "And now it will collapse because of your greed. Legacy is not what you take. Legacy is what you leave." Will rose then, his hand on the table, his voice firm. "I move to remove Richard Montgomery from all positions effective immediately and initiate legal review for corporate misconduct." The board fell silent. Then one by one, voices agreed. Seconded, agreed, motion carried. Richard's face contorted, veins pulsing in his neck. Security entered, quietly summoned beforehand. He turned his glare on Anna as they approached. "You do not belong here. You never will." Anna rose fully, her hand resting protectively over her belly. "You are right. I do not belong at the bottom anymore." The guards escorted him out, his threats echoing down the hall. When the door slammed shut, the room exhaled as if a storm had passed. Will turned to Anna, awe in his eyes. "You saved us." She shook her head. "No, I saved myself. And now we will save what matters together." That night, back at the estate, Evelyn confronted her. The matriarch's voice trembled not with power, but with something closer to desperation. "You have no idea what you have unleashed. Without Richard, this family will fracture." Anna stood tall. "Then maybe it is time it does. Families built on cruelty deserve to break." Evelyn's hand shook as she gripped her pearls, but for once she had no reply. Will stepped behind Anna, his hand on her shoulder. For the first time in his life, he looked not like the heir waiting for approval, but like a man standing beside his equal. In the days that followed, the press exploded with headlines. Montgomery Patriarch, exposed in fraud scandal. Boardroom revolution, led by unexpected voice. Photos of Anna standing in the boardroom circulated online. Her chin high, eyes fierce, papers spread before her. Comment sections that once mocked her now hailed her as fearless, brilliant, unstoppable. She did not bask in the praise. She knew the war was not won, only shifted. Richard still had allies. The press still waited for her to stumble. But she no longer felt like prey. She was a player now with cards in her hand and a future in her belly. Late one evening, she and Will stood on the balcony overlooking the city. The air was cool, the lights below flickering like stars. Will's arm wrapped around her, his voice quiet. "I do not deserve you." She leaned against him, exhaustion heavy, but hope alive. "Then earn me." He pressed a kiss to her temple, his words soft every day. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of what they had survived, what still waited. For the first time, she did not feel trapped in their marriage. She felt chosen, not by him, not by the Montgomery name, but by herself. She whispered into the night, "This is only the beginning." Anna knew survival was no longer enough. If she remained only the wife who exposed Richard, they would wait for her to falter, to fade. She needed to build something that no scandal could erase. That was when she returned to her roots. Not the marble halls of the Montgomery estate, but the modest brick home where she was raised, where her mother once grew herbs in cracked clay pots, and told her that the earth never lied. One morning she visited a stretch of farmland on the outskirts of Dallas soil, dry but rich beneath the surface. The old farmer, Mr. Travis, leaned on his post and eyed her curiously. "Never thought I'd see a Montgomery out here," he said. Anna shook her head. "You haven't. You see, Annie Robinson, daughter of a praying woman, here to buy back what should never have been forgotten. She bought the land outright using her own savings and donor grants. She pitched herself not a dollar of Montgomery wealth. She named it Riverroot Farms, a tribute to her mother's recipe card that once read, "Grow where your roots still drink." She hired locals, black, brown, white, who had been ignored by the city's booming developments. She wore boots and jeans, pulled weeds, with her own hands planted rows under the sun, until sweat replaced silk. When Will visited, the first time dressed too neatly for the dirt, he stopped at the edge of the field and watched her with awe. "You amaze me," he said quietly. She wiped her brow, smiling faintly. "This is what amazement looks like now." He laughed softly, not the arrogant laugh of old, but the tender sound of a man in love. Riverroot grew quickly. The first harvest produced 12,000 pounds of fresh produce, all donated to food banks and school pantries. CNN ran a segment former Maid turned mogul feeds Texas neighborhoods. NBC wrote Annie Montgomery's dirt-fueled revolution. But Anna did not chase headlines. She chased impact. She launched Seed Scholars, a program that taught children science and business through agriculture. She mentored girls like Jasmine, a shy 12-year-old, who handed her a crumpled notebook and whispered, "I want to tell stories like you." Anna knelt, signed the page, and told her, "Your words matter. Write them loud." At the farm one Saturday, a girl named Lena rode up on a rusty bicycle, carrying shoeboxes of hand-decorated seed packets. "I made these," she said timidly. Anna opened one to find sunflower seeds wrapped in old newspaper, just as her mother once did. Tears filled her eyes. She bought every packet for $50 and gave Lena a job. Soon the girl returned every week, helping plant rows, learning responsibility. It was not just a farm anymore, it was a bridge. Meanwhile, back in Houston, Anna began to win over society in a way Evelyn never expected. At the annual Family's First Gala, she stepped on stage in a fitted navy dress, no teleprompter, no notes. 2 years ago, I was scrubbing floors in a mansion kitchen, she told the glittering crowd. But I have learned that what makes you qualified is not where you start. It is whether you care enough to keep going. The hall fell silent, then erupted in applause. The next morning, the Houston Tribune headlined from kitchen to keynote, "How Annie Montgomery is Rewriting Legacy." For the first time, no one mentioned her skin, her past, or her weight. They mentioned her vision. Even the staff at the estate shifted. Mrs. Keene, who once ignored her, left flowers at her door. The chef baked her favorite tart with a note. "For the speech that changed the air," Bria, the assistant, whispered. "They are with you now." But Anna corrected her. "No, they are with us." Her relationship with Will deepened too, no longer built on rebellion, but on respect. At night they lay together, their fingers intertwined, not speaking of power, but of family. He kissed her gently and said, "You were the first person who ever told me the truth." She replied softly, "And you were the first who forced me to fight for myself." They did not pretend their past was erased. Instead, they built something new from its wreckage. But Richard's shadow lingered. He worked quietly behind the scenes, his allies whispering doubts, his influence still stretching into hidden corners. Anna knew the storm was not over, but for the first time, she did not fear it. She welcomed it. On a late evening, she stood on the farm, her boots caked in mud, her belly rounding with new life. The sun sinking behind the horizon. Will walked up, sliding his arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking?" he asked. She looked at the rows of crops glowing gold in the last light. "I am thinking about legacy," she said. "Not theirs, ours." He kissed her temple. "Then let us build it together." The wind moved through the fields, carrying the scent of earth and hope. And Anna, once mocked as a maid, now stood as a woman who had rewritten what power meant, not with scandal or rebellion, but with vision, with love, and with roots that would outlast any empire. The final chapter of Anna and Will's story unfolded not in a boardroom or ballroom, but on the land Anna had claimed as her own. Riverroot Farms had become more than a project. It was a movement. The rows of crops stretched green and strong, the air filled with the laughter of children, learning to plant seeds, the scent of soil mingling with the promise of change. One spring morning, as Anna walked the rows, with her hand resting gently on her growing belly. She felt a peace that the marble halls of the Montgomery estate had never given her. Will was there too, no longer the arrogant heir, but a man who had chosen humility. His sleeves rolled up as he helped Lena and Jasmine carry water buckets. He smiled at Anna across the field, his expression unguarded, almost boyish. That evening they hosted a community dinner at the farm. Long wooden tables stretched under string lights. Neighbors and workers sitting side by side, passing bowls of fresh vegetables, bread and laughter. There were no titles, no pedigrees, only people. Anna stood to speak her voice, carrying clear in the warm night. When I was dragged into a wedding I did not choose, I thought my life had ended. But sometimes what feels like an ending is only the soil breaking so new roots can push through. I was mocked, underestimated, used as a pawn. But today I am not just someone's wife. I am a woman who builds, who loves, who leads. The crowd clapped, but the emotion in her chest was not for them. It was for the little girl she used to be, whispering dreams into the pages of her Bible. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the fields were quiet, she and Will sat together on the farmhouse porch, the stars scattered bright above. Will reached for her hand, his voice low. "I almost lost you to my pride." Anna turned to him, her eyes soft. "But you chose me in the end. That is what matters." He kissed her knuckles gently. "No, you chose yourself. You saved yourself. I am just grateful you let me stand beside you." She leaned against him, her heart steady. "Then stand always." He nodded. "Always." Their love deepened, not with grand gestures, but with small constancies. Will leaving notes on her bedside, Anna bringing him tea during late nights at the office, their laughter spilling into ordinary moments. When their son was born months later, in a quiet hospital room, without fanfare, Will held him with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. Anna smiled through exhaustion. "He is ours, not Montgomery's. Ours." They named him Samuel after Anna's father, a man of quiet strength. News outlets clamored for photos, but Anna kept the first months private, choosing to guard the sacred over the public. When she finally stepped onto a stage again, baby Samuel in her arms, it was at the opening of Riverroot's second farm. "This is for the children who deserve fresh food," she said, her voice clear. "For the families who deserve dignity. For my son who will grow up knowing that power is not inherited, it is earned." The applause was thunderous, not polite. That day, Anna Robinson Montgomery stopped being a headline. She became a leader. Even Evelyn attended quietly at the back, her eyes wet, though she said nothing. Darren, once the mocking friend, extended a handshake, awkwardly muttering, "You proved us all wrong." Anna only replied, "I did not prove you wrong. I proved myself right." And Richard, far from the empire he had once ruled, watched from the shadows, powerless against the legacy Anna and Will were building. He had underestimated her, and it had cost him everything. On the farm porch one night, with Samuel asleep inside, Anna asked Will, "Do you think they will ever accept me?" He shook his head gently. "No, but that is not the point. You were never meant to be one of them. You were meant to be more." She smiled faintly, the truth settling warm in her chest. The life she had now was not the life she had imagined in her darkest nights, but it was better. It was real. It was hers. As the wind rustled through the fields, Anna whispered softly, "This is the legacy. Love roots and a future they cannot touch." Will pressed his forehead to hers. and we will face it all together. The stars above burned bright, and the night carried no fear, only promise. Anna, once mocked as a maid, had risen, not just to stand beside a billionaire, but to change him, to change herself, and to plant seeds of love and power that would grow for generations.